You need to know about the settling of the American West, or the frontier as it was called. In 1862, Congress passed the Homestead Act, which hoped to bring people out to the West. It gave them about 160 acres worth of land known as a homestead. About 10% of the United States would be settled under this plan. People who went out west to places such as Kansas and into the Dakotas on the plains, they had to get through the thick sod that was on the land in order to get to the soil that was fertile. They became known as sod busters because of this, and sometimes they took the extra sod to make a house known as a soddy. Some African Americans took advantage as well, as they were known as exodusters, trying to leave racism behind in the South to settle out in the West. There were some new farming inventions that you should know about. You have the mechanical reaper, which would help to harvest, as well as the John Deere plow. Congress also wanted to foster a lot of new invention, so they gave money in the Morrill Act to places that were opening up universities and colleges that were focused on agriculture and mechanical engineering. Some of those are still around today. But what about linking the nation? We have a major invention that is completed in 1869 known as the Transcontinental Railroad. It was built by the Union Pacific coming out of Iowa, and they were building west, and the Central Pacific, which was coming from Sacramento, California, and building to the east. The Central Pacific had many workers who were from China who helped to work on the land, whereas in the east, at the Union Pacific, it was mostly Civil War veterans. The two railroad companies met in 1869 at the Golden Spike in Promontory Point, Utah. Now people could get goods across the country. In addition, there was an increase in people demanding meat in their diet. We have cowboys. They were coming from Texas with longhorn cattle. They helped to herd the cattle up north so that the cattle could hop onto railroad cars and be distributed across the country. During this time in the West, there is lawlessness, as famous people such as Jesse James and Billy the Kid rob banks and cause havoc. There are some lawmen, such as Wyatt Earp in Tombstone, Arizona, who do help out the people with some semblance of peace. However, lawmen are few and far between. As settlers came out to the West, there were issues with warfare with Native Americans. There was organized war, such as we saw at the Battle of Little Bighorn, which was the worst defeat for the American army. This is where Custer had his last stand. But there were also indirect conflicts, such as settlers trying to kill out the bison, or buffalo as they were called, on the prairies. Bison were used by Native Americans for many different uses, including shelter and food. By the 1880s, the bison is almost extinct. Congress starts to change the way they want to deal with issues regarding American Indian lands. This is why in 1887 they passed the Dawes Severalty Act. The purpose of the act was to break up tribal land holdings. However, it didn't really do that much, as many Native Americans didn't take part in it. The plan was to try to assimilate Native Americans, give them citizenship, so that in return they could get off the land. Not many took part. In addition, at this time you have boarding schools. Boarding schools were used to also assimilate Native Americans, the most famous one being Carlisle. In addition, you have organized violence such as the Sand Creek Massacre and the Wounded Knee Massacre. The Wounded Knee Massacre began in 1890 with the Ghost Dance. This is where Native Americans wore a ghost shirt as protest against American settlers as well as the army presence. Sitting Bull was the leader, and the American army showed up to his door and killed him. Afterwards, frantic and chaotic fighting took place, leaving about 150 Sioux killed. The Wounded Knee Creek area was used later on during the Civil Rights era by the American Indian movement as a site of protest. One advocate for Native Americans you should know about is Helen Hunt Jackson. She wrote a book called A Century of Dishonor, where she spoke about all of the injustices that took place during the 19th century against Native American tribes. In addition, you should know about Frederick Jackson Turner's thesis. In 1890, the Census Bureau said that the frontier was effectively settled and closed. Turner, reflecting on this, he wrote an essay about how the West was the story of America. It symbolized rugged individualism and the American spirit.